And I think this is a great kind of circle back to the conversation around street teams. One of the things that you can do, and I think is highly underutilized, is since you can't be at every show, there are bloggers, writers, practitioners, influencers that are at a lot of these shows. And it's not
like the three
unusual.
Of us.
But it's not unusual to reach out to some of these people that are at them. A lot of the shows publish their blog squad or whatever that is for the particular show ahead of time to reach out and say, hey, we know you're going to be there. We'll cover your flight down or, the equivalent amount of money, your hotel room, whatever that is. If you'd be willing to, write a wrap-up post. What did you learn? Tell us about the event that we could share out. Maybe send a few tweets out or have your team retweet the content that's going on at some of these shows using the hashtag so the hashtag and your brand are still affiliated even if you're not there. You go to a show like SHRM, you would never see every single vendor in that expo hall. Even at some of the larger HR tech conferences, you don't have time to see every single vendor. And so as people are looking through those feeds, they don't even know you're not there because you're still sharing and you're participating in the conversation. You don't have to ignore it just because you're not there.
Welcome to part 2 of our special series on working with HR influencers, analysts, and advisors. Today, William Tincup and Sarah Brennan will tell you about street teams, how analysts bring a different perspective to the advisory role, the different kinds of influencers, why it's important to do a readership survey, and how to use them. What are the most effective social media platforms? What industry conferences do you need to attend? How do you form an advisory group? And now, here's part 1 of my conversation with Sarah Brennan and William Tincup. Enjoy. I was just so fascinated with this roundtable that Brad put together. And as I mentioned in the intro to this, I had a meeting with him to talk about his conference. And I just happened to be sitting there, and you two came and sat down, and then a whole bunch of other people came and sat down. And then Brad goes, we're doing a session here, a roundtable on how to work with influencers if you're a startup. And I'm like, holy shit, this is great. So, yeah. So we're going to do sort of a little recap. William, you started out talking about putting together a street team. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. This is the blog squad idea. The blog squad idea is like, okay, there's a number of bloggers, HR and recruiting related bloggers all over the world, and companies that want to work with these bloggers. You start with the idea that, okay, people that do writing for a living should get paid something. It's not a game of exposure or a game of we're going to shine the light on your brand, you're going to shine the light on our brand, and everything's equal. Most of the bloggers that are worth their salt have an audience. And so the blog squad idea, the street team idea is basically putting 10 to 15 of these folks together, building an editorial calendar, and then having them blog on ideas that you both mutually care about and letting them do it in their voice. So they're not doing it under a corporate voice or with a corporate tone. They're doing it with their voice. And the upside is that A, they're getting paid to do it. B, they're sharing it with their network. So presumably they've got a group of people that are following them or somehow connected to them that they're then sharing that content with. And so there's some great examples of where this is done. And all of our mutual friend, Lori Ruderman, is really great at doing this, probably the best in our space of putting, herding the cats, getting all the cats together, and getting an editorial calendar together, getting people paid on time, and then marshaling the forces and and putting the content out in the ecosystem, and everyone's sharing that content. So let's get specific. If you want to go look at Career Builder and the way that they've built kind of a blog squad, if you will, you've got Tim Sakic, Jennifer McClure, Matthew Stalick, Lori, a number of other people. They not only share their own content, but they share each other's content when they publish on that forum. And so it has this kind of rippling effect of not only going through your audience, people that follow you, but then people that follow these other people. And so it has a really, really nice effect. It's acknowledging that you're not going to do it yourself as a company. It's like, yeah, we can have a blog. But if we blog, are people really going to listen to us? Are they really going to pay attention? And the answer is not really. No one really trusts vendors in that way, because a vendor will never tell you something that's outside their own interest. Whereas a blogger might actually, talk about something and it, not be in the vendor's best interest, but they just want to talk about it openly and honestly. I think the more of that happens, the better. But you pay for these things. So Peter, I'll put a bow on it. You recognize that people that are out there that have writing skills, they have an audience. You'd like to work with them, and there's a way for them to come out on top and for you to come out on top by building a street team, blog squad, etc.
I was going to say, I'll add on to that. A lot of, especially startups or mid-sized companies, are already paying bloggers to basically ghostwrite their blog anyway. And so what you're doing here is you might be paying a little bit more per post, but the difference in reach is astronomical. And so it's not like you're not already paying this if you're trying to start a blog, because most startups do not have the time or in a lot of cases the industry expertise to be writing the content on a regular enough basis on their own. And so it's not a full cost, it's an offset in some ways of other costs they would have otherwise.
Right. And how many times have we gone on to vendors' websites and clicked on the blog link, and the last blog was written in January of 2017, right?
Right.
That's right.
So, Sarah, you're coming at this from a little bit of a different perspective. You're not just an influencer, but you're an analyst. So what are some of your perspectives as far as startups working with influencers, perhaps from an analyst perspective?
Yeah, I think the analyst community in HR tech and recruiting tech, talent tech, but all of this new larger segment that we talk about has really evolved a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. And there really has become a more blurring of lines between the analysts and influencers. In some markets, like the talent acquisition, you definitely have much more influence by certain kind of bloggers and analyst influencers versus the traditional analysts. And in other areas like learning and compliance and kind of more core HR, the traditional analyst groups like the Persons, the IDCs, Sierra, those groups have a lot more influence. And so it's really also just kind of understanding your market and what works best for you without excluding any of them. And I think one of the things that's really important when you're working with the analysts is to make sure that it isn't always about trying to hire them to write a blog for you. It's making sure they're aware of what you're doing. And so scheduling things that we call briefings, which are 30, 45, 60-minute meetings to talk to them about kind of what you're doing as a company, what your product is, your roadmap, what you're looking ahead at, some of the wins you're having, so they understand where you sit in the market, and they can help position you around and even do introductions for you in some cases. Just gives them some insights. There is a model, and I think it would actually make sense. One of the things I think we missed is to walk through kind of the 6 different levels of influencers, William. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be a good thing for you to kind of press the cover. But they do have a model. They do have an investment approach, and there's 2 different types of true analysts now in this space. There's a little bit more traditional that is working at one of the main analyst firms, and there's a handful of those in this space. There's probably 5 or 6 of the analyst firms. And then you have a lot of the people that used to be at an analyst firm, like myself, Madeline, and Trish, and you have this other whole group that now has become independent analysts. And so they work as solopreneurs or have small teams with them, but are doing more of a hybrid of analyst work, but also then focus on some strategy and consulting side of the business as well.
So, William, something that you brought up in this roundtable that I was really fascinated by was your recommendation to do readership surveys. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is an old, kind of an old trick or an old way to find out, what is your audience consuming? Where are they consuming? What are they consuming? How they can, all that stuff. And so, it's just a survey that you should do twice, if not quarterly. And it's a survey that says what magazines do you subscribe to, HR magazines. What conferences, HR conferences do you go to? What analysts do you follow? Who do you follow on Twitter that you find great technical information from, et cetera? And questions like, when you're making a technical buy, who do you pay attention to? Who do you listen to? And so the idea there, as a marketer, what you're really trying to do is learn, what does my audience consider important? What podcasts do they listen to? What blogs do they, go and look at every day and subscribe to, or RSS? I want to know where they're consuming information, from whom they're consuming that information. And on the buy side, what you really care about is who's influencing the purchase. And that's why the readership survey is important, from that perspective, is you want to have an idea as a vendor of, let's say it's Sarah, Tim Sackett, Chris Dunn, and Matt Charney. Well, all 4 of those folks are contributors of Fistful of Talent. Well, then the decision as a vendor, it's real easy to go to Fistful of Talent and take down some media. Maybe buy a white paper or a webinar or some type of advertising package, because your audience is already going there.
Right.
Your audience is already consuming content there. Why not spend money there at that outlet? And so that's how I think the more frequently that you do them, to quarterly, the better you have that finger on the pulse of where they're getting that content.
And I actually extend them out with the clients I work with, where we also include products and the product teams in both reviewing the results and also crafting that, because a lot of times it's important for them to understand this type of product. What other solutions are you aware of? What other products are you interested in, or do you have a favorable rating of? Because then it also tells you, as you're doing roadmap design and as you're looking at kind of the market ecosystem, both from a product marketing perspective as well as kind of the roadmap, what are the expectations going to be of those buyers? The second thing that I think a lot of companies miss is that they do these readership surveys only of existing customers. And I think it's equally as important to do them as potential and prospects that both are in process, not in process, but also the ones that you lost, and doing almost like a lost customer with all of the same things, because understanding where they're going for information might help you see what other influence they're getting from what other vendors, from the writings that are going on that are potentially hurting you guys in the greater mix.
How do you determine what social media platforms are the best for your particular brand, your particular niche in HR tech, meaning the Twitters, Instagrams, Facebooks, LinkedIn's? How do you go about making that determination?
So I think one of the things that you're wanting to do is, if you are, especially as a startup, you're often very limited on your marketing spend, as from both a time but money perspective. And so you want to make sure that you're spending your efforts where it makes the most sense. And there are different segments from a social media perspective that are more fruitful, we should say. Some are definitely more brand focused, and others have a little bit more influence or conversation perspective. I can tell you from my experience, kind of across the board, both startup, mid-size, and enterprise companies, typically Instagram is one of the lowest for me on where I do recommended spend. LinkedIn typically has really great results, and Twitter only because you get really good reach, and it's something that you can do with minimal investment. There's a lot of opportunity to do it without a lot of time or cost. And Facebook is hit or miss. I'm not a huge fan of Facebook. I've seen a lot of money spent on Facebook with nothing, and I've seen Facebook a lot of money spent with decent. And so it really depends on kind of how their algorithms are working that particular. As I say, at the end of the day, you need to be assessing every 3 months what is and isn't working, and tracking and looking at the numbers and looking at the results and making decisions specific to your company and specific to your time, what is and isn't working, because what works for one may not work for the other. William?
I think, it's hard, Peter. It's a great question, by the way. It's hard because I'm riddled with biases. I think we all are, but I'll just speak from the first person. I liked MySpace. I like Friendster. I like the second version of MySpace. I like all of the ones that you've mentioned, probably some of them the ones that you haven't. And so the harder part of Valor, and the harder part of solving this riddle that you put in front of us, is you got to take the I out of it, and you've got to depersonalize what you like to do or what I like to do, because I love Instagram. I actually love Instagram. If they took it away from me, I probably would stab somebody in the neck. So I love Instagram. Now, is Instagram right for a sourcing technology startup? The way to actually solve that algebra is similar to what we do in the readership surveys. Find out where your audience is consuming social. What social are they consuming? What media are they consuming? Where are they at? Where are they active? What are they consuming? And then put your money, i.e. your content, in the areas where they are, with disregarding your own biases for whatever media that you like or don't like, which is extremely difficult. Because to Sarah's point, you can look at a Facebook and you can say to yourself, it's political, it's this, it's that, it's a lot of hate and people doing this and that and the other. But here's the deal. If your audience is using Facebook and the secret groups in Facebooks as a way to learn and share content, then you should be doing stuff on Facebook. So it's not about, that's an egomaniac like myself. It's not about me.
Right.
It's not about what I think. It's about solving for where's the audience? Where are they now? And to Sarah's point, where are they every day? And where can we get the best bang for our buck? I love what Sarah said about looking at the analytics, constantly scrutinizing the analytics and making sure that you're making the best spend that you can possibly make. But if buying a hashtag or putting an advertising on a hashtag makes a lot of sense because your audience is at that particular hashtag, then you don't have to love Twitter.
Right.
You don't have to even love hashtags. What you have to love and fall in love is how do I get my stuff in front of the audience, that I care about. And so it being kind of a social animal, you'd like to think that you have all the answers up until the point where you have no answers. And that's the advice I give to everyone, really all vendors, is you have to solve this little riddle on your own all the time. And it's a kind of a consumer marketing axiom that as soon as you understand your buyer is the very moment your buyer changes. So it's true in social. Like, so you might think LinkedIn is it. It's, this has just been working. It's a champion. Here we go. And if you're not looking at the analytics like Sarah advised, and you just keep thinking that thought, well, you might lose the fact that, no, your audience has swung over to Facebook for that type of content now. And your audience is constantly swinging in and out of these social channels because it's in their interest, because they want to. It has nothing to do with you. Great question. Hard question to give a 4-second answer to. But truth is if you want to do it correctly, you solve the algebra for your audience, and you put media in front of your audience, and you look at the analytics to make sure that you're constantly doing the right thing.
And to add on to that, doing social media well isn't just about being there and showing up. And so you need to extend and analyze not only what sites are working, but be doing A/B testing on what you are doing on social media. So if you add memes, do you get a better response than if you add just an image? Does that get a better response versus just having a link? And be constantly looking at each of those and not having a static strategy across all of them. What works on LinkedIn is different than what works on Facebook and different than what works on Twitter. And much like you were talking about removing the bias, we have to remove this kind of one size fits all concept. And even more important than that, we have to get over this concept that was kind of drilled into us in the early 2010s that you can't track social media, right? It's just all about the branding, and that's not real. Just like we kind of argue that in HR now, you have to have analytics, you have to be making decisions from a business perspective. You have to be doing the same thing with your social media activity. Otherwise, you're wasting time.
So on the topic of Facebook and LinkedIn, it seems to me that Facebook has completely co-opted the group paradigm from LinkedIn, that the groups on Facebook are far more active and potent than on LinkedIn.
Depends on the group. Yes. And
okay.
That's what William was talking about. It's really important for you to be constantly looking at the metrics and the numbers to see where something is moving and what it's going with. Removing bias. I am not on Facebook. I haven't been on Facebook for 4 years. I personally don't like to use it for my personal life. That doesn't mean a company shouldn't use it, because there's still millions of people, billions of people, right, that are using it. And in how many months it might shift over to, Snapchat was hot for a little bit, and, Instagram might show up somehow with groups, right? You never know kind of where it's going to go, and it's why following the analytics will actually help keep you ahead of the trend and not be following the trend of your readers and your potential buyers. You don't want to be the last to know.
Right. Yeah. I heard, there's been a rumor going on for a couple of years now that LinkedIn was just going to dump the whole groups thing, but it's still there. There's still people doing groups.
Yeah, I think they've opened a lot of those things up. They've made the group managers angry because they don't own the groups. I mean, that's the thing in LinkedIn is they've been taking those things away slowly over the course of years, that you don't really own the group.
Yeah.
You started a group, but you don't really own the group, which is something we all probably need to kind of come to grips with in social. If you use social media, if you choose to use social media, you don't own. They don't own. You co-own, or nobody owns, or whatever.
It just exists.
But it's exactly Fugazi. It's a fugazi. It's a fugazi.
It just is, but it is.
I want to do that Matthew McConaughey. So yeah, I think that Peter, you asked a great question about Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups. Truth is, these are tributaries to where people are and where they're trying to find some type of connection. You can take a large Facebook group, and what you might get in a large Facebook group is people asking questions about like products. And the hard part about that is you'll have 115 people add responses, And then how do you find those responses, 6 months later?
Yeah.
It's, it's like that, the knowledge that was there, it's very difficult to kind of keep that knowledge because you don't remember what group, and you don't remember who said that one thing about Taleo Enterprise or Brass Ring or whatever the important thing was. And so it's in the moment, they're interesting because you're having conversations that are about that moment. But the problem is it's fleeting. It's like a gnat's lifespan. It's fleeting and it goes away. Now, the problem with LinkedIn groups is it's more about publishing. It's kind of a one-way, I have an article that says something about so-and-so, and then it's publishing and maybe you get a couple comments, but really it's not a two-way. There's not a lot of dialogue.
Yeah.
So that now they're easier to track and search for in LinkedIn. But there's less of that back and forth. So again, let's take our biases away and let's think about it from the user audience experience. Where are they playing? That's what I want to know. Are they sourcers, and they're going to the SourceCon Facebook group every single day and chiming in on something? Well, then I want to go there every day, and I want to listen. I want to learn and listen and be a part of whatever they're doing every single day. That's the harder part for us, and especially vendors, is to say it isn't about what we like. It's about what they like and what they're consuming.
I think one of the things that is also very encouraging by what you just said, especially if you are a startup or you are a company in the HR tech space that has had some challenges or opportunities for improvement over the years, there's a very short memory in this space on a lot of areas, especially things in those Facebook groups. And there have been times where I've gotten a call from a CEO or a CMO late. They're freaking out. Somebody made a negative comment. It's not true. What do we do? They're very upset and they get very stressed. And 3 months later, no one's even going to remember that happened, right? It's not showing up in search results on Google. I think the thing to remember is the average practitioner is not involved in any of this stuff. How they find a lot of these things is by going to Google, doing a search, and seeing what comes up in search. Twitter comes up in search. LinkedIn content comes up in search. Things that are put on blogs come up in search. That is kind of where those positions lay out. For a number of practitioners, that's where they get information, right? They ask some questions, they Google some stuff. It's more the leading edge and definitely more the minority of the tens of thousands of HR practitioners across the country that are in those Facebook groups day in, day out, commenting, reading. So even if it was in that group and there's 20,000 members of that group, maybe only 150 people even saw it. So it's also important to not take things out of perspective and set either that as your strategy or feel like everything is destroyed because of something negative happening in one of those areas.
Back to this whole thing with these startups who are trying to figure all of this out. Let's talk a little bit about all of the conferences out there that are soliciting for your money to have a booth or be part of a startup, whatever. Beyond the startup stage, we have Unleash, we have HR Tech, we have HR Tech Summit, we have ERE, we have SourceCon. I mean, there are conferences literally year-round now. There's conferences in July and August.
Yeah.
And so how do you go about, as a startup, trying to figure out not only where to spend your money at these events, whether to get a booth, whether to be part of a startup thing, or whether just to attend? How do you go about making that kind of an assessment?
I think, and this depends a lot on the size and the stage of the company. Obviously, if we are pre-Series A and very early stage, it's a very different answer than if you already have your first couple of rounds of funding and what your end goal is. one of the first questions I always ask a startup is what the end goal is. Is your goal to grow this and become, the next big thing? Is your goal to be acquired in the next 36 to 48 months? What is that goal coming in? Because that, at the end of the day, is going to help make suggestions on what events you should be going to and how you should be focusing your attention at those events. For me, there are a couple of the bigger shows I think are really key for somebody to attend. I would do the HR Tech Show in the fall, and one of the reasons why is you can do the Startup Pavilion. So if you are early, there's a very affordable option to be able to get in and get some access. And if you're not as early and you have some money, there's other opportunities there. But what you can do while you are there is not only exhibit. That show is not, in my opinion, necessarily about getting a bunch of leads and being able to close a number of deals. But what you can do is meet with all of the analysts. You can meet with a number of the influencers. But more importantly, for a lot of smaller companies and startups, you also get to meet with all of your potential partners, alliance members, companies that you potentially could have a relationship with on a long-going term. And it might not be that they take you seriously year one, but year two, year three, it's starting the foundation of those relationships that can really help grow. And if you're looking to be acquired, most of the larger firms that are doing acquisitions are actively there, especially in the startup area, taking a look. There's been a number of startups that have been acquired within 90 days of the show over the years. And so it definitely is where HR tech vendors do business with HR tech vendors. In the spring, obviously you have one of the larger ones is going to be Unleash. And it's nice that they're at two different times of the year. Early still in the US, but has a nice global reach. And again, you get a lot of the larger vendors there. You get a lot of leadership and executive teams attending that show as well. And so it's important to, not only focus on some of these little shows where they might seem like they're less expensive to do. It's looking at the kind of the overall reach of what else you get out of it. After that point, you look at your budget. Does it actually make sense for you to go to these shows at all? In a lot of cases, until you're a couple years in, you just can't afford to do it unless you're doing the startup area, because that money would be better used being spent elsewhere. If your executive team is strong and can have conversations, then go without, go with just buying a badge or just an ExoPass and just have conversations and meet people. And hopefully you're probably working with some of the influencers or analysts, and you might be able to get some introductions through them to other people you can meet with. If you are a startup team that is, I would call technical founders, and have a little bit harder time on the networking side of this, make sure you're working with somebody from a coaching perspective to help you get prepared for these conferences, because it can make a big difference in how you approach the influencers there, how you have these conversations, how you even approach customers that are there if you're not doing a booth.
Yeah, I think Sarah is really kind of given a lot of the things that I would probably say. It's again, it's algebra, and you look at it as such. You have to solve for, is this the right idea? And it isn't a crowd mentality or kind of a mob mentality. Everyone's going to SHRM. Well, does that mean that you need to go to SHRM? And in doing so, what are you trying to achieve at SHRM? SHRM Annual is a wonderful show. We've all been.
Yeah.
Everybody on this phone call. It's a wonderful show. Are you going for buyers? Is it lead generation, MQLs, and that's why you're going? Okay, well then, okay, we acknowledge, like, okay, that's why we're going. Okay, there's going to be 20,000 people there ish. Okay, all right, makes sense. Well, how are you going to get them to the booth? What are you going to do to actually manufacture the traffic? Because you can make the decision, we're going to go to SHRM. You can make the decision to take down the 20 by 20 booth. You can make the decision that, yes, this is about MQLs. But if you fumble on the 2-yard line and you don't do anything to get them to the booth, you're going to be very, very unhappy at the math when you do the ultimate math of customer acquisition. I think Sarah really, in plain speak, kind of talked a little bit about, well, you have to really challenge why you're going to each event. And what are you trying to get out of each event? And sometimes it's not a bad idea to skip an event. It's not a bad idea to
skip most events. There's hundreds of events. You have to skip most events realistically.
Right. And I'm even thinking about, there's 1,200 HR conferences in a given year in the United States. So that there's plenty of HR conferences. But even HR tech, if you're at every HR tech show, it's almost like you're too easy to get to. You're not, there's too much surplus, if you will, not enough scarcity. And so I think vendors that show up to everything look a little bit desperate. It's kind of an odd theory, but it's for me, I've tried it a couple times, and it's A, you're not missed, and B, the show goes on. So there's that. But C, the people that really are that are fond of you miss you, and they reach out to you, and you kind of learn, you as a vendor, you kind of learn who your friends are and who people that care about you. Like, hey, I didn't see you at so and so, HR Tech Summit. I didn't see you in Toronto. Why is that? Oh, we just decided not to go because of so and so. Like, the legit reasons for not going for the show can be it's endless for why you would not go. I think it's justifying to yourself and making sure that your executive team, your board, everyone on your team is all in lockstep for why you're going to the show. What is success? That question you gotta pose to every single person on your team and get everyone to answer it the same way. Like, we're going for brand exposure. We want everyone in the conference to know our name. All right, cool. Well, then there's levers. There's levers to pull then. If that's the game, then there's all kinds of things that you can do to get brand exposure and get people to know your name. Done. But it's where with the disjointed experience that I think happens to vendors, Peter, is where one group, the sales or the C-suite, thinks it's one thing, and the marketers think it's something else. And they don't align their strategies. They don't align like why they're going to this event. And they will talk openly about what success is and isn't. And they get back from a show, and one group thinks it's a success, and the other group thinks it's total failure. And that creates, internally, that creates a lot of stress for marketers and salespeople too.
Yeah. And I think this is a great kind of circle back to the conversation around street teams. One of the things that you can do, and I think is highly underutilized, is since you can't be at every show, there are bloggers, writers, practitioners, influencers that are at a lot of these shows. And it's not
like the three
unusual. Oh. But it's not unusual to reach out to some of these people that are at them. A lot of the shows publish their blog squad or whatever that is for the particular show ahead of time to reach out and say, hey, we know you're going to be there. We'll cover your flight down, or the equivalent amount of money, your hotel room, whatever that is. If you'd be willing to write a wrap-up post. What did you learn? Tell us about the event that we could share out. Maybe send a few tweets out, or have your team retweet the content that's going on at some of these shows using the hashtag, so the hashtag and your brand are still affiliated even if you're not there. You go to a show like SHRM, you would never see every single vendor in that expo hall. Even at some of the larger HR tech conferences, you don't have time to see every single vendor. And so as people are looking through those feeds, they don't even know you're not there, because you're still sharing and you're participating in the conversation. You don't have to ignore it just because you're not there.
Right.
That's great advice.
It is.
One of the other things that was talked about in this roundtable that I would like both of you to address is how do the startups go about forming advisory groups?
I think to me, advisory is a lot of things to a lot of people. So if you talk to the traditional analysts at Gartner, they would say advisory is one thing. You talk to somebody that's been out in the market, maybe a recovering marketer like myself. I look at advisory as basically go to market. How does one solve for sales and introductions and pricing and things like that? So when I got into the advisory business, it was 2009, 2010. I had sold the equity in my business, and a friend of mine, Jerome Ternek at Smart Recruiters, had sold his interest in his business and carved out a business called Smart Recruiters. And both of us had nothing to do, like literally. He had made a bunch of money. I didn't make as much money as he had made, but we literally talked every day. So at one point he's like, I feel guilty because we're talking every day. I said, well, I don't have anything better going on. It's fun to talk to you. He goes, well, why don't I make you an advisor? I said, sounds reasonable. So we wrote up a legal agreement, and essentially it was he gave me a boatload of shares in his company so that we could talk, and I would give him advice. That then led to the next one, and 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 the next one, etc. And I've started to kind of get the feeling of, okay, if you have money, let's say you're into your C round and you've got a ton of money into you, it's consulting. You want to hire me to drop me in for a day, teach you about something X, Y, and Z, and you just want that knowledge for the day. You're not giving up equity for that. You've got money. You just write a check for it. And so you just hand a check over to me and it's done. But a lot of the people that I fall in love with in this space are gals and guys that crazy enough to have some idea. They want to take it to market, and it's a cool technical idea. Really great market opportunity, and they don't have two pennies to rub together. So, and I still want to work with them. I've kind of come to grips with, okay, there's people in this world that have money that can pay me consulting rates, and there's people in this world that don't have money, that the economic model is equity, and it's a hope. It's a hope that that equity becomes something legitimate, like that there is an accident, and that money becomes real. If not, I'll have wasted my time. Well, I can waste my time on a lot of other things, so I don't really look at it like that. Because I could just sit on Google and go through Wikipedia for 7 hours a day, and that'd be wasting my time. I'd still be learning, but it'd be wasting my time. I tend to, I tend to put a litmus test, if you will. I've got to love the entrepreneur. Check. Got to love the technology. Check. Got to love the market opportunity. Check. Goes through those three things, then I'm in. Now it's a question of, do they have money? If they have money, then we just work out an economic deal, X number, whatever the project is, and you do a thing. If they don't have money, then the conversation becomes, okay, what are you building an advisory board? An advisory board tends to be between the management team and the board of directors. Board of directors has fiduciary duty. There's certain things you really shouldn't tell your board. I know it's taboo to say because if you go to your board with certain issues, they're going to wonder why you're not managing the company, because that's what your job is to, as the CEO, is what your job is. But if you go to your advisor and say, hey, I have a salesperson who is killing quota, like massively killing quota, but he's kind of a racist. So what do I do? Like, I can't fire him for cause, because I just, even though it's ethically and morally probably, in our handbook, it's not written in our handbook that you can't be a racist or borderline racist. We all know it's, bad to be a racist, but he's killing quota. killing quota. Like I doubled his quota and he keeps killing his quota. What do? You take that dilemma to your board of directors, and they're going to end up firing you for not handling that dilemma in a certain way. You take that dilemma to an advisor, and they can give you several different options of ways to deal with that issue. And I'd love for the public to think that your board of directors is this open and like almost like the Roman Senate. The truth is, it's not. They have fiduciary duty. They actually run the company. Their job is to run the company and to manage risk. And so when you bring to them something about somebody that's a racist, they don't hear any of the other part. They hear racist, fire that person quickly. Let's get out of that risk. And morally and ethically, that's exactly, you should do that. But there's also different ways to treat it. And so an advisor, ultimately, the best advisors in our space are very flexible, adaptable. They follow kind of a driver-passenger model of, okay, sometimes you need to drive, and I need to just listen to your ideas and then tell you yes or no. And sometimes I need to drive and say, hey, there's 15 things that I've been thinking about with your company. What about this, and this? So the problems that get solved at the advisory level, I would tell you that there's no two problems that I've solved that are the same. In all of whatever 10 years of doing this, I would solve the same problem twice. So extremely flexible, pliable. You're looking for people that, either have industry expertise or they have some type of specific, chops, marketing, finance, operations, something like that. But you want domain expertise, subject matter expertise, industry expertise. You want people that around you as a CEO and founder, you want people around you that you can go to at any given point and go, hey, I've run into a wall. If you were faced with this thing, what would you do? And you want, a series of women and men to then chime into that and say, here's what I do. And then you can make decisions based on that.
And I'll add on to that, there is a difference between kind of your board of advisors, which I think it's really important to have and do exactly right, where it's a nice broad mix of people. But I think for a lot of people coming into the space, both as startups, but also even enterprise companies use advisors for different things. It's also nice to have one or two people that are truly advisors for certain business things. And sometimes we call them executive coaches or growth advisors or whatever, umbrella we want to call it, that can work with you. And not all advisors do both sides. Like William said, there's a spectrum of advisory. For instance, I started doing advisory work roughly around the same time William did in the late 2000s. And in some cases that brought me in as a acting chief strategy officer for a company to help with the turnaround. In other cases, everything is, once a quarter we have a call and check in. And so what that looks like and what that is going to be crafted like really is going to be unique for each person that you're working with and as well as each company. And some people need help with product. Some people need help just with understanding the market and helping coach their marketing team on the stuff we've already talked about. How do you work with influencers? How do you do this? But you're doing it from a little bit more of a strategic advisory role than what an advisory board would have. And so I think one of the big differences also between paid versus a stock or shares is also how much of an expectation you have on that person to actually do work.
That's totally
right?
fair.
Is
I think I tell folks, in fact, Peter, if you want to model, because I had to think about this a lot. I was forced, as I was taking on different advisory roles because of people I love. I had to really think about this, go deep into my own psyche. Like, what do I really, really think about this stuff? Because it does bring up, there's all kinds of natural conflicts and quagmires that we have to deal with. And some people can kind of get lost in those things. And so what I wrote, and I hate it when people, like writers, refer to the things that they've written. It's kind of like a jump the shark moment. I despise that. Well, I wrote about that
In my new
so,
book.
in my new book. Yeah, I hate that.
How about this? Let me say,
I
William,
did.
didn't you write
I did.
something
I'm
about
about
this
to.
that you can refer to?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
all right. It's fair. It's fair. It's fair. I take all the darts right in the eyes, as I should. But in trying to figure this out for myself, because it is a moral and ethical kind of, I'd say, dilemma. It's not really a dilemma, but it is kind of an interesting, if you work with vendors and you work with practitioners, how do you represent yourself, yet at the same time have a relationship with clients, people you advise, people that you don't advise but are friends with, things like that. So I wrote about it, and I'm about to tell you about it. So on my LinkedIn profile, at the very top of it, in the bio section, which is buried, is essentially a treatise about the 15 ways that I work with startups. And it's my kind of ode to this is what I'm good at. Like, if you're trying to get me to do something that's not on this list, don't ask. Because if it's not on this list, I'm not good at it. Now, the things on the list, not to toot my own horn, beat my own chest, or any of that other stuff, yeah, I'm probably pretty good at it. After doing something for 20 years, it turns out you get adequate at certain things. So I built this treatise, and I basically said, yeah, this is what I do. So if you're curious, holla. But I'm going to put it right here out in the open, and I put all the companies that I advise, I put them on my LinkedIn profile, I put them on my bio, my speaker bio, like total transparency. And when practitioners ask me about, because Sarah gets asked about vendor selection a lot, and I do too.
Yeah.
I literally tell them, now listen, here's the people that I want you to do demos with. Here's a company that I advise that I want you to do a demo, but I want you to scrutinize them the same way, if not harder, than the way that you scrutinize these other folks. Okay. So I'm not putting them on the list because I advise them. I'm putting them on the list because I think they're ultimately a pretty good solution to what problem that you've told me. But I don't want you to give them a pass at all just because I'm advising them. I'm advising them because I think they're badass. But that doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be the best at solving that solution or that problem that you have. So I'm very upfront, very transparent with people about advisory work. Like, I'm probably harder on the companies that I advise than I am on people that are companies that I don't advise. Ironically enough, but yeah, I think there's many ways to do advisory. I think if I were looking at it from a startup perspective and going to market perspective, I would look at it and say to myself, okay, how do I surround myself with people that are quote unquote smarter than me at different things? Because you can't, as a founder, you just can't know it all. And at different stages in the company's history, every 6 months or so, you're going to need different tools. And you're going to need to be surrounded by different people and ask different questions and things like that. So I'll shut up. I'm sure Sarah has plenty of them.
Well, I'll just add on to that. Like, it's also, for me, with startups, it's helpful for them. And I know we can accelerate movement because I've gone through this so many times, right? I've seen why when the product that they're presenting first came out in 2007, and then when it got released again in 2011, and it's the third cycle of the same segment of the market. People like you and I that have been doing this a long time, we have that historical information to understand, okay, well, here's why the market didn't accept these things previously. And here's maybe some ways to work around. Here's how market has changed in order for you to understand this. We aren't a marketing or an advertising agency that is going out and doing research online in order to give advice. It's because we've worked with, dozens and dozens of different vendors over, 10 plus years and watching what has and hasn't worked, both either directly through advisory, through consulting, or just because these people have been our friends and seeing what worked and didn't work with their own experiences. And so the industry expertise, I think, above all else, is really, really key. And a good advisor also knows most other people in the space. So if you need a new website, you need a social media person, you need whatever this is, they've got a call in. You know, one of the startups that I'm working with, I guess 3 weeks ago, called and said, hey, we really need a head of marketing. Do you happen to know anybody? Here's some of our criteria. That was on Tuesday. I had somebody for them to interview on Friday. They made an offer the next Tuesday, and he's already started.
Nice.
Right? And so good advisors aren't just well connected with what's going on in HR tech. They're connected with the people of HR tech as well, and can really help you kind of expand that out. And so it has to be a relationship you are comfortable with, and those people truly, in a way, become your friends, right? If it's somebody where you're like, I don't really like them as a person, don't work with them.
Yeah.
I don't, there's products I don't care for, but I see the potential and I believe in the potential. Sometimes I'm proven wrong, right? But sometimes I'm not. And it's really about, making sure that the personality and the style of how that person works and what you need really comes together well. The culture fit. I hate saying that, but it's true.
That's our show. Be sure to tune in to the Total Picture podcast tomorrow for our final installment of How to Work with Influencers, Analysts, and Advisors, featuring Sarah Brennan and William Tincup. Comments are welcome on this show page in the leadership channel of TotalPicture.com. While there, please sign up for our free newsletter. You can subscribe to Total Picture on iTunes, Google's new podcast app, iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or your favorite podcatching service. And join the conversation on our Total Picture Radio Facebook group. You'll find me on Twitter at Peter Clayton. Connect with Sarah at I'm So Sarah, and William at William Tincup. And if you missed it, be sure to tune in to part 1 of our Working with Influencers series featuring Brad Sutton of GSV Accelerate. Total Picture is your podcast resource for the future of work. See you next time. Thanks for tuning in.